I'm Mark Cowart, and over the past 40 years of ministry, I've witnessed how walking in faith can transform lives. Today is a time like no other. In our homes, our nation, and around the world, we're facing realities that requires our faith to be put into action. Will we answer the call? The future is in our hands. I invite you to join me in studying these foundational truths. Hello and welcome to the Victorious Faith broadcast. Good to be with you again today. And I have a very special guest with me, no stranger to this broadcast or to our church here at Church for All Nations, Bishop Joshua Lwere from Uganda. Bishop Joshua, it is so good to have you with us again.
Thank you.
And I do want to remember, this is not your first time on the broadcast. So I just want to let everyone know that you can go and visit our website because we've had some very powerful interviews. And whenever you're on, you always bring some very powerful and positive feedback. And so, but we're here today basically to talk about some very powerful things that are going on in Uganda. Right. And, you know, when you and I met many years ago, Linda and I, my wife and I, we came to Uganda. It was during an election time.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget because we had a mutual friend that connected us. And so I thought, well, I'll go on to the State Department's website here in America and find out about travel to Uganda. And it's like, warning, do not travel to Uganda unless necessary. Yeah. And then it said elections are going on and people have been shot and killed. Yeah. And so we went ahead and went, which we believe it was the will of the Lord. And I'll never forget, we would be driving around and big truckloads of soldiers and military, and it's a time of great unrest. So I'm trying to remember, what would that have been? What year would that have been?
2011.
2011. Yeah. Okay, so that was our first trip. Yeah. Between now and then, a great deal has happened. And even though on previous broadcasts, we talked about your youth, your upbringing, I think a lot of times when we talk about Uganda, people think of Idi Amin.
Yeah.
They think of Milton Obote.
Yeah.
They think of Joseph Kony, very evil man.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I fall back on, Bishop Joshua, is the people of Uganda are very special to us here. We love them.
Thank you.
Think that I love them very much, my wife and I, and yet there are people they've known a lot of pain. And so we're going to just let the Lord lead us in these next several broadcasts because there is so much going on in Uganda by the Spirit of the Lord. You're affecting all 7 mountains of influence, the mountain of the church, the mountain of government, the mountain of business. And if you go back to my very first trip, which was way back in the early 90s, it has changed radically. Give us a firsthand report from Uganda. What are you seeing from your perspective of what the Lord's doing in Uganda and how it could bless the world?
First of all, to summarize my story, for those who don't know me, I'm Bishop Joshua Lwere. I'm coming from Uganda. I grew up in Uganda. We have 56 different tribes. As a nation, we are such a variety. But what you have as racism here is tribalism there. It's so powerful.
So what is considered racism here is really tribalism there.
Yeah. Although we are this, when you look at us, we are the same people. Yet the differences are so big, far more than you may even have here as racism. So tribalism has affected us greatly. When the British came in Uganda in the late 19th century, they took over, ruled us for 70 years. And after that, we got our independence from the British in 1962. They forced different tribes, of course, to come together as a nation. But right after they had left, these differences immediately started to show up. One tribe fighting the other tribe. When one tribe is in power, the other tribe is trying to. So most of our political parties were formed on tribal lines and religious lines. So when you have a party, one party is from predominantly from one tribe by this religious group. And then the other is like, so that quite really divided us so much that right after our independence in 1962, within 4 years, that whole country had disintegrated because there were civil war started. One tribe is in power, another tribe is fighting. The people from the north kind of identify themselves as one group, and then the south. So there is the north-south divide. Then even among the south, there are still, differences. So this was the reason why we had all these civil wars. So our politics could not, stabilize because the colonial powers used the divide and rule method. So they, just like in Rwanda, the genocide in Rwanda, our neighbor. So they divided the Tutsi against the Hutu, so that when the colonial rulers left, the fighting went on. So that's the similar situation.
Oh, can I interject right here? Because I remember one time I asked you, you were telling me about one tribe killing another.
Yeah.
I mean, if literally they bumped into each other, they would begin to kill each other.
Yes.
And I was sitting there and I go, Bishop Joshua, I said, in America, we have racism, and the basic thing is, well, one skin color is lighter than another, one's darker than another, and therefore that's our supposed difference.
Yeah.
And I says, but in Uganda, you're all the same color.
Yeah.
And immediately you started to teach me about tribalism.
Yeah.
So really, it's like setting people against
each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that explains much of the civil wars and problems that we've had for all these years until recently, when we are trying to really melt and remove all those differences, both in our politics and in the day-to-day life of the people. When I was growing up, for example, when I was here one time, for example, when Dr. Obote was in power, Obote, maybe let me start with Amin. Obote ruled before he overthrew the first president, changed the constitution, and then he was overthrown by Idi Amin. And so when Obote was in power, he persecuted the people of the previous king. The king was from Buganda, which is the biggest. So the people of Buganda felt, oppressed. Many died. Then Idi Amin took over from Obote. Now Idi Amin starts to kill the people of Obote who are from the north. Amin is from the north. Obote is also from the north. One is from West Nile, another one is Central North. So just that you can see that Dr. Obote's people really suffered under Idi Amin because he went in some places and just killed all the men. So you find so many widows. Many years later, I talked about Idi Amin's son when I was going around talking about reconciliation. Idi Amin's son, I went with him to do reconciliation to one of these tribes. And he stood there with the relatives of Idi Amin. And these many widows stood up and came one by one, saying, we are ready to forgive Idi Amin. We had never forgiven him.
You're talking about Jafur?
Yeah, Jafur Amin, the son of Idi Amin.
And so I just want to make sure everybody's tracking with this, because I met Jafur when we were there.
Yeah. And
he's amazing young man. Now, if you Googled him, you might find, that he was of a Muslim faith, but he's born again now. Yeah, and so we were talking, and I'll never forget one day we were talking, and he goes, well, my dad was a really good dad. And I really hoped I didn't offend him. My face fell. And I said, your dad was a good man, good father.
Yeah.
And I don't know, Idi Amin, how many children do you think he had?
More than 60 or 70 children.
60 or 70 children, but Jafur,
is one of those.
One of his favorites.
Yeah.
And now you're traveling with one of the sons of Idi Amin.
And we go to this tribe, which was greatly persecuted by Idi Amin.
Which means many died.
Many died. Many died. He would go to one particular town and pick out that tribe. They are all killed, and their widows and children are put on a truck, and they are, sent back to that particular area, this particular area where Obote was coming from. So there are so many widows. So many widows, men who were families which were widowed because of Idi Amin. One of the sons of those people who were killed is a doctor. He flew in during the time when I was with Idi Amin's son and relatives. He came from Europe, and he said, I heard that Amin's family is coming back to our city to repent and reconcile. So he had to fly back from Europe and came. He said, I wanted to witness because I could not believe that Amin's family has decided to come and apologize to us.
You know, Bishop Joshua, I just really feel we need to take a pause here for a second. Because one thing that strikes me about, well, even you yourself,
Yeah,
that first trip we met, 2011, we were all driving
yeah,
and drove past your
yeah,
village area.
Yeah,
And I had no idea of your background. And
yeah,
you're driving along, and we were going to do like a little safari on the end of the trip.
yeah.
And you said, this is my village area. And then you told me how that Obote's men came.
Yeah,
They had a knife to your throat, and they were ready to cut your throat.
yeah.
And then this commander appeared and said, let that one go.
He's just in school uniform.
But
Can't you see?
it was worse, though, still, because many of your family was killed.
Exactly. Right? So during that time, the present government, there were the guerrillas fighting Obote 2. There was Obote 1. He ruled the first time. And then he came back after Idi Amin and ruled again. So when he comes back, and during his time, their guerrillas were fighting him. So my tribe, were from the south, Obote is from the north. So these soldiers who come in the village, enter homes and massacre families. So at one time, they came. I can't remember the number. There were about 30. They entered our village, and of course, every time people would hear about them, they would run away. So that day, I was in the house. I didn't know they were coming. So my siblings and other people around the house, they saw them coming, and they all ran to the forest. I didn't know because I was inside. And it was a holiday time. We had just come from school. It was the miracle of God that day I was still in my school uniform. Because as soon as I came out, they got hold of me. This soldier got hold of me, pulled the knife, that bayonet, you call it the bayonet?
Yeah.
Yeah. And he put me on the window. So my head, I had a lot of hair. Now I'm growing old. So I held me by my hair, put my head and neck on the window to just cut my throat. Now, my cousin had been killed a couple of weeks earlier. He was shot. He was not very far from us. He lived just next to us. And we were not allowed to bury him for a whole week. And many others had been shot and killed, and others had been taken to prison, tortured. Some of them became insane. Two of my uncles became insane because they were beaten. Others were maimed. So they were taken to certain places where, similar to what Idi Amin used to do. So when my relatives, my family saw the soldiers coming, they knew our cousin had just been killed and many other people had been killed. So you see the soldiers, you run. At that time, I was about 14, 15 years. And when I come out like this, I can't even run because our cousin tried to run outside and they shot him. So I knew I can't run. If you run, that's sure deal. They're going to shoot you. So I stood there frozen. And then he takes this knife and he wants to cut me. And I can't even say anything. Fortunately, the commander was from the south. The majority of the soldiers were from the north. The commander was from the south. So he said, can't you see that one? He's in school uniform. Just leave him. He's not a gorilla. He's not a... So they left me and just walked through the village and they did all the other work. So that day I survived. I don't know who would have been here on this broadcast. I don't know what. So,
well, and of course, when I hear this story again, no matter how many times I've heard it, I believe that was a divine intervention because of the role you're playing today in Uganda and have been for many years. But I think one thing we as Americans need to understand, we can't even fathom the depth of pain that the average Ugandan
during those 5 years, we lived in trauma, because any day, any time you had one school, but every time you had a bullet, you'd take cover. You either hide under the bed or you'd run, because bullets, people were dying left, right, and center. The whole villages that were finished. After those 5 years of the war, when we went into that particular area, it was called Lwere Triangle, where the war especially took place. There were thousands and thousands of skulls of people. The current government, had to come up with heaps and heaps and heaps.
So what did that smell like?
Oh, you can't have even
Because
imagine.
it's so hot in Uganda.
I went to one of the villages to do community work, and I find these young people, and they said, we saw our brothers being massacred. When I was in school, one of the people I was staying with in class, in my room, my roommate, he said, I saw my parents being killed. I survived, and my sister, we survived. But the soldiers came into the house. They forced my father to sleep with my mother when I was watching. And then they were forcing us to kill our parents. And then for him, he managed to survive, to hide. But then they started to stab his father to death and his mother. So he saw his father die. He saw his mother die. He saw his sisters and brothers being killed. This young man lived in trauma for a long time. You would be talking with him, and he's like, he just like wakes up. It's like that thing constantly came back.
Oh my God.
And almost every part of Uganda was affected by these wars I've talked about. So it's rare to find one particular family which has never been affected by these wars. So for me, I witnessed so many of our people being beaten. Because I was young, we survived, but our mother, were already orphans. Our father died when we were still young, but because of the politics of that day, he died of heart failure. He had to be taken to a hospital, and they were looking for him just because he belongs to another party. He belongs to another tribe, so he died of heart failure. So we remain. He had 21 children. I'm number 18. He was polygamous. So when he died, we were scattered, and we ended up living in a village. And in that village, our mother had to make ends meet and look after us. And then the whole family was scattered. One woman went with 3, another one. So all of us 21. We never saw each other until we were old. But so you can imagine so all his property was lost and distributed, taken. So even my inheritance, when I later found his will, had been taken and sold. So every family somehow suffered the trauma, the politics, so every day, every time you had a bullet, somebody has died or somebody is going to die. And this was not robbers or what, but just soldiers using the gun, government gun, and nobody was, they were allowed to do anything. During Amin told his soldiers, when I give you a gun, I've given you your father and your mother. You don't need to ask me for salary. So if a soldier during Amin's time found you with a good vehicle, he had the right to take it. If he found you, so this went on for a long time.
And I think we as Americans now, you've taught me so much about this. Because when we first started, you were already being used by the Lord to, he had given you that revelation of discipling nations, not just making individual disciples, which is great, good, but how you could disciple a whole nation. But the bottom line, you told me Uganda was never dedicated to the Lord. It was really dedicated to witchcraft. And so what we're seeing in America is a departure from our foundations of Christianity.
Right.
And even Gramsci, the socialist communist, he died in prison.
Yes.
And the one that talked about the long march through the institutions, he said socialism and communism could never come into America until the roots of Christianity are cut. So you're telling us the picture you're painting, which is a horrible tragedy, could only happen when the gospel and Christianity is not there. And you used to always challenge, or you still do, that we have the foundations. We have what would you say to America? Because we see what happens. when a nation
Departs
rejects God,
God, yeah.
but righteousness exalts a nation.
Yeah.
Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. In your contrasting between America and Uganda, what would you say to us as Americans?
Let me first paint another picture. Even before that politics I've talked about, which came after the colonial powers, the colonial masters, our British colonial masters, ruled us for 70 years, from 1890 to 1962. But even before that, we had these tribal wars, this tribe trying to extend its power to the other. Those happened for a long time. But even in the midst of that, our tribes were worshipping other gods. A lot of witchcraft, sorcery, divination. This has been on for centuries. So when the British come in, and of course the Arabs, they bring the Muslim religion and the Christian religion, and of course that time there was a very powerful revival, which transformed particularly 3-4 areas in Uganda. That East African revival was very, very powerful
So
because
that was the East African revival.
yes, it started in Uganda, spread to Rwanda, Burundi, and the East
And
African
what
countries.
years are we talking?
1835, 1830s to 30s, basically. So by the time we get our independence, Christianity had some roots in some areas. There were some particular tribes that had been fundamentally changed and affected by the gospel. Not very many, about 2, 3. Others, just it was religion. It was not Christianity. So majority of our people, 85%, have Christian names, John, Peter, but it's mainly name, nomenclature, not real Christianity, not being born again. So we have less than 15% were Muslims, 85% Christians, but a small portion of those are actually born again.
And I've noticed when I was there, Christian, because I looked it up, you have a large percentage of Christian, but they talk about the born agains.
Yeah.
So there's a distinction between those that are actually born.
Exactly. So now the born agains are about 20%, which is both the Pentecostals and the Evangelicals and part of the Anglicans. Anglicans are what you call the Episcopal here. So we have so many who are born again now. There may be about 30% because there are many among the Anglicans, the Pentecostals and the Evangelicals, the Baptists. But majority of the rest of the Christians, who make about 50%, they are Christians in name, but they don't know the Lord on a personal basis, commitment. So you need to understand that. So in the midst of these wars, you have all this mixture. You have people who go to churches and mosques, but in the evening they go to their gods. They have the shrines. That's very uncommon here, but to our country it is common. So somebody is in church, but then syncretism, you call it syncretism.
That's syncretism.
Yeah, but the next,
kind of a mixture.
Exactly. So then they have a shrine. So when I was growing up, we were young, we would go to church on Sundays, but once every month we would go to the forest to worship the god of the village. So we would go and in a tree, there was a big tree in the forest, deep in the village, in the forest, 3 miles. We would walk singing songs to be inspired by the Spirit so that we can locate the tree. And then we'd go, all of us. When I was young, I was shocked how all of us, the whole village would fit into one tree under this huge tree. It was supernatural. But we would go there and people would ask and pray for this, pray for the other. So that's what I grew knowing. Every Sunday we go to church, but the last Sunday of the month, in the afternoon, we would go to worship this tree, the name after which name the village was named. So you can see that. So when I talk about your nation having proper roots, for us, even those who had come out of witchcraft, they still left one leg. So you came to church to officially appear, belonging to God. Then in the rest of the time, most of your time, you're going to the gods. You worship other gods. So when we were young, we went through all those rituals, and it was normal. It was normal for us to do that. Everybody believed that's the way you lived. Majority of our people who do business. They believe you have to get some powers of sorts to empower you to do your business, to succeed in business. So for us, when it comes to discipling the nation, it goes very, very deep. That's why I kept telling you that for you are so blessed, because you have generations, 300 years, 400 years of Christianity, wiping out a lot of, these evil roots of witchcraft and sorcery.
What fascinating stories we've heard today, and the trauma that people experience. I've said it before, you don't have to go to war in Afghanistan or any of these other battles that we've seen our military have to go into to experience trauma. You can experience trauma and actually develop post-traumatic stress disorder just being raised in a dysfunctional home. One of the things I've been fascinated with, there's only two types of trauma: trauma A, trauma B. And those are the things absent in our life. And then the trauma B are those brutal things that have happened to you. If you felt that something was stirred in you today, I want to encourage you to call. We've got prayer ministers standing by right now. They're ready to pray with you. And I just believe that the things that were shared today, to think of some of the testimonies, Bishop Joshua, who had really a traumatic childhood when he came home one day and his village had been raided, family members killed, and a knife put to his own throat, but miraculously spared. But that is still a trauma. And so I just trust that there was some ministry today. Also know, if you would like to get these messages, we have that available for you. You might have thought of somebody that you want to share these with. And but one thing we do know, Jesus came to heal the brokenhearted, to set the captive free. And that's what trauma does. It breaks your heart, and then it captivates you, and it puts you in an invisible prison. But Jesus took care of that on the cross. And I'm just believing that today ministered to you. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you on the next broadcast.
Thank you for joining us on today's broadcast. What a powerful teaching. Our hope is that you were strengthened by today's message. So I want to encourage you to take a moment and to ask the Lord, what are my next steps? One thing we hear Pastor Mark say all the time is the value and importance of reading, studying, and meditating on the Word of God, as well as implementing prayer in our daily lives. As you do that, we know that you will grow tremendously.